Workers these days are worried about losing their jobs to robots, and Statistics Canada has taken notice, and they've done a study entitled The Employment Consequences of Robots, Firm-Level Evidence. And to discuss that with us, we're going to have Dr. Jay Dixon, who's an economist with StatsCan. So welcome to the interview, Jay.
Thank you for having me, Markham.
Now, like in the energy, and particularly in oil and gas, we see automated ore haulers at Suncor's oil sands mines that are going to replace 400 or 500 jobs. We see automated drilling rigs, which are moving into the industry now, that will use fewer workers on the floor. So those are a couple of examples, I think, where we see robots displacing workers. But maybe we could start this conversation with just a quick overview of your study, please.
Yes, so the first challenge we had is actually deciding what robots are. There is no real fixed definition. They are seem to be machinery and equipment that have a degree of autonomy and a degree of decision-making ability that not noted in normal machines and are more the province of human beings. But there really isn't a category of a definite category that distinguishes robots on the one hand in most data from machines with microchips in them, let's say, or a degree of programming and a degree of intelligence. We did notice that there was one category that, or one data set that did seem to make that distinction, and it was the import data. Canada has a robotics industry, but it's mainly focused on the programming and configuration of robots rather than the construction of the hardware. And so we were able to track robotic hardware coming in to Canada, and in many cases we could attribute them to the firms that were using them.
Now, your study came to some very interesting conclusions about what type of workers get affected. And if I understand this correctly, high-skilled workers that have university degrees, actually their prospects improved. Low-skilled workers who high school or less, their prospects improved. But those in the middle, those who are maybe have a vocational degree or a trade, they actually came out worse. Maybe you could explain that.
Yes, so what we found is that when the robots came in, the firms themselves reallocated their workforces into different tasks. And the high-skilled workers tended to go, we think, much more in design, in customer service, and other areas, services surrounding the manufacturing process or the production process. We weren't really able to figure out what was happening in the low-skilled workers, except that there's a lot of, let's say, manual tasks that robots can't really manage very well. And the general expansion of the firm encouraged those workers to, the hiring of those workers. But the middle-skilled workers, the ones that had certain vocational training, oftentimes I think has a routine aspect to it. Let's say one of the industries we noticed was in the chemical industry, the lab technicians who were preparing samples and would do a vocational degree or higher training in order how to learn to do that precisely and properly. It was that type of task that required a degree of precision, but I had a high degree of routine that seemed to be the robots seem to be taking over.
Let me give you or expand a little bit on the example of the automated drilling rig, because I interviewed a couple of CEOs of companies in Calgary that are making these drilling rigs, and they said, you know, there are people on the floor, there are people handling pipe, they're, you know, kind of manual labor. Those jobs are all going to be gone, but instead there are going to be a couple of people in the shack that'll be supervising the machine. That was a skill that was emphasized by those CEOs, and they're going to have a facility with data. They're going to have to be able to supervise that machine and know what the numbers are saying and crunch the numbers themselves, using software. And the other thing was repair and maintenance, because robots are more sophisticated. They require more maintenance and repair. And so there might be the same number of jobs, but to be very different jobs. Is that applicable to some of the stuff that you're seeing?
I think very much so. And in addition to one of the things that the robots have that machines don't is they're a lot more flexible, but you need somebody there to be able to teach them the tasks that they're going to need to perform, and then monitor them to make sure that the quality is consistent, and step in and help them when it's not. And those type of jobs, definitely you'll see um, a lot more workers tasked with that, becoming managers of the robots. The robots are doing the actual work, and the people are monitoring and making sure that the robots are doing an appropriate job. Uh, Sorry, with the middle skilled people, I mean, a lot of what their job already consists of is using their judgment to make adjustments to the process that they're doing. In this case, they're no longer hands-on, the robots are hands-on, but the workers are still there needing to manage and make sure that the robots are reacting properly to changing conditions, let's say.
That's a really good point, because the experts I've interviewed about this have pointed out that even if they shift jobs and that they rely more on software, they rely more on data, they still need that deep understanding of the industry, because it's about judgment.
Yes. Yeah, and tacit knowledge is a very important part in a lot of these tasks that robots with machine learning techniques. Machine learning allows them to develop some tacit knowledge, but they're still running considerably behind what the human brain is able to do, and picking up things that are noticing patterns that are not programmable or are much more difficult to program.
One of the reasons why companies adopted robots, and it's interesting that cutting jobs was not one of them. Improving quality of the product, improving quality of the service, and this struck me is safety, worker safety, because that often came up in oil and gas. And sometimes I have to admit I was a little skeptical. Like that might be kind of a bit of a spin by the companies.
Yeah.
But you found that in your survey.
Yes, one of the aspects, and it varied across industries. One of the industries that came up was in foundries, where you were able to interpose the robots between the human beings and the hot furnaces, and to make sure that they weren't being exposed to the hazardous conditions to the same degree. Another one was repetitive motion or handling awkward objects. And those type of skills were also a motivation in the construction industry, and lifting heavy objects or repeatedly lifting heavy objects. And with oil and gas, let's say exploration, or nuclear power as well. You have robots that are going into hazardous environments that human beings it'd be much more difficult for them to navigate safely.
Sure. Last question, Jay, and it gets back to the type of workers that are going to be affected by the adoption of robots. And one of the things your study found, and again, I found this very interesting, is that there will be fewer managers, because once you've replaced the workers with robots, and the workers are supervising the robots, then the workers themselves require less supervision.
Yes, I mean, we're very interested in this result, and there's two aspects to it. My co-authors and I have been debating what the primary motivation of this is, but one of the aspects is certainly because the robots in the course of their activity gather a whole bunch of data, it's much easier for a supervisor. You need fewer supervisors to monitor the workers to make sure that the job is being done properly, and that's a function of the fact that you're getting so much more information that the robot is gathering about the production process that allows you to make management decisions. The other aspect of it, though, is that we found that firms that adopted robots, one in Canada at least, one of their major focuses was to be more flexible. And so we're wondering if maybe the flexibility means that you want uh, more nimble workers, more empowered, and also more capable of making quick decisions on the shop floor, and less of a rigid hierarchy that takes longer to respond. We haven't been able to get at that, disentangle those two issues, but those are two hypotheses that we're thinking about it.
Just one final observation before I let you go, Jay, and that is it's apparent to me from looking at the oil and gas industry and then other energy related industries like wind and solar and hydro and utilities and so on, the very nature of work is changing. And the nature of work over the last, from say 2010 is becoming quite different in 2020 and will be very different in 2030. Is that a fair observation?
Uh, as far as we can tell, yes, I think that would be fair to say.
Jay, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Markham.